In 1961, the United States of America still lived under a regime where racial segregation remained in force. Segregation had its evil roots in slavery and in false ideas that black people were biologically defined, fundamentally different from white people, that they needed to be controlled in law and that they posed a threat. This week has been Trans History Week, and I'm making this video to mark that. But this week is important for another reason as well. This week has a double significance. I hope you'll listen for just a few minutes, wherever you are and whoever you are. In this week in 1961, on the 4th of May, a group of 13 young people, 7 black and 6 white, started what became known in history as the Freedom Rides. They were students and others who believed that segregation based on notions of biological difference and race was fundamentally wrong and inhumane. They travelled on buses from Washington, D.C. to Jackson, Mississippi, and refused to comply with racial segregation. The riders met violent opposition in the Deep South with extensive media coverage. The story of their own peaceful resistance is now part of our shared history and helped to spark the progress of black people in the USA towards the end of the segregation era. We in the UK now face a new future of segregation following the announcement of the Labour Party government's choice to require trans women to use male spaces and vice versa, irrespective of anatomy, based on a bogus concept of biological sex and the idea that it is determinative of destiny and of rights, without the slightest regard for the inhumane treatment now being meted out to trans people in the UK in the name of biology. I've been inundated by messages of support from women, men, and of course many people from the LGBTQ community who are horrified and frankly scared at the direction which the present government has adopted. Scared that male police will now strip search women who until just 3 weeks ago were legally women and often anatomically female too. Scared that the abuse of lesbian women frequently suffered due to prejudice against trans people will now become so much worse. Scared at what it means for their children's futures. I've been contacted by men and women this week who underwent a change of sex decades ago and who are married with children, who have jobs where nobody has ever been aware of the fact that they're trans. They face now mandatory outing at work and to family. They face having to explain why they're using the washrooms appropriate for the apparently opposite sex, suddenly. I've been contacted by trans people now arranging to escape to Ireland and other countries for their own safety. I've been contacted by one person considering giving up her life. This week, sadly, also has a third historical significance. This week, in our country, the Conservatives proposed legal measures which would, in effect, create a register of all trans people, and in many instances reverse all identity documents and records, stripping us of the last remaining shreds of our human dignity and privacy remaining after the Supreme Court ruling and its entirely foreseeable consequences. I need not explain just how sinister and terrifying the concept of a register of a small vulnerable minority is. We all know the history of the last World War. But this is not just a criticism of Conservative policy. The Labour government, if it continues on its present course, will logically have to do something equivalent if it's going to enforce its new biologically determined agenda defining women. This week may therefore mark the start of something leading the British people to a darkly controlling and oppressive future. Whether or not the Supreme Court intended these consequences is irrelevant. They were to be expected because judgments are read and interpreted politically by governments, and now those dreadful consequences are with us. I rather suspect that the Supreme Court didn't intend these consequences, but they can't of course comment. Mistakes are made if those affected do not get to argue their case. One of the Supreme Court judges who wrote the judgment had an extended set of exchanges actually in 2023 with me during the progress of the 4 Women Scotland case. This was before their promotion to the Supreme Court. In those exchanges I was raising concerns during the progress of that case about washroom usage and urging the judiciary to have a policy towards trans judges such as myself. A group which I mentioned by name was later allowed by the Supreme Court to have a voice in court whilst we were excluded. In one email I said that I want to draw your attention to the debate in Parliament on the 12th of June coming up in relation to matters touching on whether my sex should be changed legally without my consent, with all that entails, and I think I prudently have to go on record to ask you to pursue the much needed, much mooted consideration of policy. In an email to me, the judge said, please don't make any assumptions. We do not want to do anything that will make you feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. To the contrary. And in a later email to me, the judge, before their promotion to the Supreme Court, said, I do not anticipate the judiciary introducing a policy legitimising disrespectful and deliberate misgendering by staff, colleagues or court users of any other person, judges or otherwise, nor do I think the court service is able to dictate such terms. Please don't make these assumptions. That judge had been looking into whether there should be a policy dealing with how trans judges were treated, but was promoted to the Supreme Court before that happened. So it's a strange twist of fate that the same judge wrote the judgment by which the present situation came about, along with the decision to exclude me, and with me, all trans people from the case. So I want to express my gratitude for the service which our Supreme Court gives us and the country, and my appreciation that it must have been very hard to rule us all out of being heard after the conversations previously held. Being a judge is hard sometimes, I know from many years of experience. So to be clear, the responsibility to put matters right now lies squarely on the shoulders of the Prime Minister and on the European Court of Human Rights, and not on the Supreme Court, who, like me in the case itself, now do not have a voice. Will the government pull back at the last minute before the very worst of all this hits us? What happens next will be a part of the history of civil rights in the UK, just as the freedom rights were back in this week in 1961. What that history will be is yet to be written. It's in our own hands, and especially in the hands of students and young people whose future this affects, and of all our allies in the wider community, and of course in our own hands as LGBTQ people. The unknown future rolls towards us. We must face it if we can, with a sense of hope. Thank you.